In it here now, I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna bid on here now, who bid $500,000 bid.
Welcome to the Legacy of Agriculture. This program will explore the past, present, and future of agriculture. We'll look at the people, products, and events that have formed its history. And now with today's guest, your host, Chris Bair.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us on this Saturday morning. We're pre-recording in the WNAX Pfeiffer's recording studio in Yankton, South Dakota. And today I've got a special guest on, a gentleman by the name of Denny Everson. Denny, thank you for taking time out of your busy retired schedule to join us on the Legacy of Agriculture.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you.
Now, you've been retired for a little while.
I have. I retired 13 years ago.
Okay. And you were in the baking industry for 34 years?
37 years.
37 years. And so the reason why I've invited Denny to come on to our show is that he has a tremendous amount of energy and a very synergetic man. And oftentimes in agriculture, we don't get to sit in somebody else's seat. And it's always intriguing to me to visit with leaders in the baking industry like you, Denny, and say, what was it like to sit in a banker's seat and go through the 80s and go through the farm crisis and coming into the 90s and watch the ebb and flow? What was it like? First of all, introduce yourself, and then tell us what it was like to be in the baking industry almost 40 years ago.
Oh, sure. I born and raised in Mitchell, South Dakota on a farm. Graduated from South Dakota State in 1973 with a double major in agronomy and animal science. Not exactly the two things that you would necessarily take when you're thinking about being a lender, an ag lender. Mm-hmm. And I didn't do that immediately. I went home and farmed for a year. A very drouthy year, I might add. And one day I was at lunch with my father, who was a farmer, obviously. And I said, I won't be here this afternoon. He says, why is that? I'm going to go to town and find a job. And so I drove into town. The first place I saw was a government agency, the Farmers Home Administration. I walked in. She said, what kind of loan would you like, sir? And I said, I'm not here for a loan. I'm here for a job. And consequently, they gave me one. And I spent a year and a half with them. The rest is history. I joined the banking industry here in Mitchell originally, and then eventually up in Yankton, and enjoyed the ag lending career up to my retirement and since, because I've been very involved since in the lending side, especially teaching.
So what did you like best about the baking industry back in the 80s? The 80s were the toughest time almost in the history of agriculture in the United States to be in agriculture.
Yeah, there was nothing good about lending in the 80s. And, of course, when I walked into that government agency, it was 1975. So October 9 of 79 hadn't happened yet when they deregulated interest rates. And but I was in the middle of banking, or started banking at that point. And the distance between 1979, that day, and about 1990 was treacherous. We lost an entire generation of bankers. They quit. And I was one of them among many who stayed, and we fought it out.
Why did you stay through all of those tough years in baking? I mean, I would imagine there was always somebody looking for your hide.
It was a difficult time. I like to tell this story, and I do at all my. I teach a lot of ag banking to bankers, and I like to tell this story. They said that question's always there. What was the 80s like? And I tell them that I had a customer at my desk one day who remained nameless, obviously, and I put 22% on his ag operating loan that day, 22% interest. And he looked at me and he said, Denny, you know I can never pay this off. And you know what, Chris? He kept his promise. He never did. And so that's the way it started. And you had to kind of kick yourself to get up in the morning. And there was more than one time when my dear wife, Jan, said, Denny, why do you do this? And I said, there's going to be a time when it will get better. And I want to be part of that. And I want to help try to make it better. And that was one of the reasons I showed up here at Yankton, South Dakota.
Well, you know, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, Denny, when it comes to the baking industry. When I got into the auction industry is in the very early 90s when we were coming out of the 80s. There was a lot of FHA work that was being done, and there was a lot of damage that was done to agricultural producers. But I am always amazed at agricultural producers, especially our farmers and ranchers, that they are the hardest working, most optimistic, dig their claws in type people that there is on the face of this earth, and they just don't quit. They just don't quit. So how does that relate to a banker when they're struggling in the 80s and early 90s and they just don't want to quit? However, it just doesn't make sense anymore for them to keep farming.
There was a couple of things that took place then that was very that I learned early and supported wholeheartedly. Is we always tried to work with people that were willing to try to help themselves. Okay. And that wasn't always the case in the 80s. But if they wanted to try to help themselves, we were all about hanging with them and trying to do all we could do. The other thing I promised myself when I got through the 80s is there were so many people, and a lot of young people, my age about that time, who would come into the office and say, I've got just enough equity to make one more lunge at this to see if I can make it. And you know what? Most of the time, I was unfortunate or fortunate. Unfortunately, I let them do that. And I'm not proud of this, but I put them out on the stripe of the road. I mean, I and the bank, and it wasn't just our bank, it was everybody. And I told myself after that, I'm never going to let any producer come in here and say, I've got just this much money left. I need to have one more chance. And if it's like, okay, that pile of money can do a lot of things for you if you chose not to be in this industry instead of letting it lose it. And so consequently, my theory after that was if they wanted to bet the mile, that last mile, I'd ask them to do it with somebody else because I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, you were trying to make good decisions and to help them preserve what they had worked so hard for, and that takes a lot of discipline.
Yeah,
a tremendous amount of discipline on your part and on their part as well. When you started in the 80s or 70s, as you said, did you ever think that you would make it into a 37-year career?
I was pretty sold on it, even from the time I started with the government, working on doing agricultural loans and other loans. I loved the industry, and I had told myself that this is where I wanted to be. This is a profession I wanted to do, and thank heavens I wasn't detoured from that, and had lots of opportunity after that.
Well, Denny, we're coming down to the end of our first segment at the Legacy of Agriculture. We're going to be back in just a couple of minutes after commercial break. This is Chris Bair, your host with the Legacy of Agriculture.
Hey, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeiffers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeiffer's. Nobody does it better.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us on our show. If you're not able to catch us on WNX Radio on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, you can also join us on Apple and Spotify under the Legacy of Agriculture. And also we have a website called thelegacyofagriculture.com, and now on YouTube at the Legacy of Agriculture. You can join us on any of those platforms if you happen to miss our show. I do want to say one thing, and I'm sure that Denny Everson, who's my guest, is wishing everybody a happy and a safe harvest. Right, Denny?
Oh, of course. It's the drive here this morning was a reminder of, hey, it's the season. And it was always exciting. But to get to this time of the year for any producer and former banker, it's a good time of the year to see. And the crop looks reasonable here. Well, not everywhere, but here.
We had one of the toughest years in eastern South Dakota and western Iowa and northeastern Nebraska with torrential rains the end of June. We had some crops in the field, some crops not in the field, and record-breaking floods. And our agriculturists have come through with shining colors and came back and did there's a lot of cover crops out there that actually look really, really good too. And so we're wishing all of our producers a happy and a safe harvest. Denny, as many years as you were in banking, we always have a tendency when we're talking coffee shop to always talk about the negative, but you have a negative experience somewhere along the line, but then you have 100 really good experiences that you help a guy out that maybe had his back against the wall and needed that one more time. Tell us some of your experiences about being able to help people in the banking industry and some of your goals in helping people be successful and stay successful.
Sure. One of the things that as we pulled out of the 80s, we had to do things differently. And technology improved. And our abilities to help people help themselves and better understand their own finances was amazing. And that was the part of it that I was so excited to be part of. It's like, okay, we don't have to guesstimate how good or of a manager they are or aren't. At least on paper, we can see it now, and the computerization, everything came out of the 80s then. So that was the fun part, to be involved in that piece of it, because it helped, I think, in many ways ensure us that maybe we wouldn't visit the 80s again, and it did. So consequently, and the other piece of it, it wasn't specific to any one family, but I was always interested in the fact that our producers were great at producing. They just needed help trying to understand marketing. And so even especially after I got to Yankton at First Dakota National, I set up a marketing class to teach marketing to anybody that wanted to come. And it was fun because they didn't have to be banking with us, but I could see the interest a lot of people had. It's like, okay, one of the reasons this happened to me was I did a great job of producing, not marketing. And so a few at a time, we kept that process up, and that was great. And then the other thing that came along, I learned early in my career of the significance of strategic planning.
Okay.
And I've always been excited about the fact that I took my whole staff here at First Dakota, my ag staff, my ag finance staff, and we started promoting what we called kitchen table strategic planning.
Really?
And so we and others in the bank that were good facilitators, because you had to be, not everybody can facilitate, but we would offer up to our customers or other people, hey, we'll come to your table, your kitchen table, and we'll work with your family or your operation strategically, and we'll help you set up a plan, a strategic plan. And that's since expanded dramatically at the bank, and is a tremendous program today. So much so they can't even keep up with the demands at this point. But that was one of those things that we never had the opportunity to think about. And I go back against all those ugly times in the 80s, and I think that's what taught me, or I tried to figure out what could change so that we wouldn't go through this again, no matter what the circumstances beyond our control. And I really believe that for strategic planning for my staff and for my department, as well as for our customers, for those who have had the opportunity to take advantage of it, has really been good.
I absolutely love this idea of the kitchen table strategic planning. So you would actually go out to a farm family that, whether they were a borrower or not, and you would sit down and teach them about what? And what would this kitchen table strategic planning look like, Denny?
Oh, it was the first thing we do is set them all down. Now, there isn't time to get into the entire thing, but what we would do is we go through what we call the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities.
Okay.
So we talk about, I get out a piece of paper and we talk about their strengths, and we put it on the wall.
Okay.
Now, what's your weaknesses? Now, this is a little tougher. This is where the elephant hide had to go on, and everybody, maybe dad looked at sons or sons looked at dad. But it was always, and sometimes it wasn't all that congenial. But
probably pretty uncomfortable, too.
Yes, it was, and that's where the facilitation was important. It's like, we don't want to start a war. But
or should we call that a mediator, right?
Yeah, sometimes that was exactly right. But we'd put that on the wall, and of course, those are the two things that you could take and you had control of.
Sure,
you could do something about. But then you get to the threats and opportunities. Those are things beyond your control.
Okay,
but they were important, and so we would list those as well. And whenever it worked out, I would love to, if it was a large family operation, and most of them were. I wouldn't have the wives attend this meeting, the spouses. I would ask them, I'd ask the guys to leave, and we'd bring the ladies in and sit them down and go through the same SWOT analysis. And then it didn't always happen this way, because sometimes they just all showed up at the same meeting. It was, okay, we'll do what we're going to do. But when we separated them, it was quite honest. Then we put them all together and said, well, this is what the guys said, this is what the gals said. And that was significant in almost every meeting, because it was usually quite different. But those that understood and really were there and purposeful about doing about it, not only doing the planning, but establishing a plan, and then, of course, execution of the plan. Wow. And I can think of a number of farms that I helped that did that, and I believe it was part of their success.
So basically you were helping give direction to the farm family. It was helping them align and really opening the doors of communication.
Yeah, direction, no. Facilitation, yes. I had nothing to do with what they decided to do.
So
I
what's
just
the
tried
difference,
to keep
Denny?
the battle. Well, it's like me not being an advisor or taking sides, because there would always be, when you get to strengths, weaknesses, there's always going to be some give and take here.
Yep.
But so I was in charge of being the peacemaker, the mediator, or saying, okay, now we're at this point. This is where we're going to go next, because they didn't know what to do. And so you did the SWOT, then you established the objectives. You got the objectives drilled down, and those objectives turned into being a plan, and those plans including action plans, and that meant somebody's going to do something by when. And at the end of the day, that action plan was what, and then they had to take it, and then you check with them, however, periodically, because you saw them quite often, as to how's it going, because you wanted to make sure they executed.
I think that's absolutely amazing. I think this is one of the reasons why, Denny, I do this radio show is because I learned something every time. Would you agree, Josh? Josh is my tech guy that's in here, and oftentimes we go home from these radio recordings and go, and the light comes on, and we go, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. Well, Denny, we're coming down to the end of our second segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. We appreciate Denny for joining us, and we're going to go to commercial break here in a few minutes. But I want to give a shout-out to our sponsor, Pfeiffer Auction Realty. For a complete listing of all of our land and equipment auctions, go to pfeifers.com. And, folks, we're going to be right back in just a few minutes.
Hi, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeiffers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeiffer's. Nobody does it better.
We're back with the Legacy of Agriculture, and I'm your host, Chris Bair. Denny Everson has joined me as a retired banker that started clear back in the 70s. Denny, thanks again for joining us. And we had a really interesting conversation going on in the second segment, and you were talking about your kitchen strategy planning table, SWOT is what you referred to it as. So when you would go in and have these meetings, and you would first strengths, weaknesses,
Threats and opportunities
with just usually the men and then the women. When you got done with this entire process of putting on this information session with a particular family, did you ever walk into and sit at the kitchen table and say, I really don't want to do business with this family, but by the time you laid that whole program out and got done talking to them and you walk out saying, I want to do business with these guys no matter what. There was my perception maybe was skewed and thinking that I didn't want to do business with them, but now that I can see their core values or their morals or their thinking that we're going to do business with these guys, I want them as one of my clients.
Great question. I guess I'd preface it by saying I never went into one saying I don't want to do business with this family. Sometimes I walked into these situations because this family needed this stuff, because we knew in the management side of things there was issues. And that's why they invited us to the table, quite honestly. Or we would look at them and say, you've got issues inside your operation. Let us try this. And this is a strategic planning process. And so I walked into a lot of times thinking, sometimes thinking, I hope we can make this work for them so they can make it work for themselves, because I want to continue doing business with them. It didn't always work. As much as I'd like to tell you every time we walked in it was Christmas, it wasn't.
Right.
And so some worked out fabulously. Sometimes when you get into strengths and weaknesses and everybody looks at themselves, there's problems. And sometimes no matter what we tried to facilitate and help them with, there was times when, that after that, sometimes the family split, sometimes the operation went out of business. So there was a lot of great stories where this worked. And there's also a lot of stories where it doesn't, and right now, First Dakota calls this to keep farmers farming. That's what the program is. They developed into. It's specific, and it's working for most, but not for all.
And that's kind of a misconception out there with banking is that the banking industry is there to complement the operation. It's not to overpower it. It's not to take it away. It's simply there to complement the operation and help that be successful. And it's really no different than the implement dealership or the seed dealership. If somebody goes on to a farmer or ranch with the intent of getting rich by selling seed to them, you're going in for the wrong reasons. You should be going in there because you believe in the product that you're selling. You believe that this particular seed is more drought resistant or more weather resistant, or you got a shorter growing season, and the seed that they're currently using isn't quite working for them. Is my philosophy right, Denny?
Oh, it's exactly right. On what we as lenders, being so close to our customers, what we always had to watch is that, look, it's like they would look to us, for advice, and it's more like I would always tell my staff, and they were good about it, is we're not here to give advice, we're here to console. And so let them run stuff by us, and we can just, lend an ear and then give them our thought, but not our advice. I mean, it's their operation, and how do we know what's better for that than them?
Yeah.
And that was what we always tried to.
One of my most favorite stories, Denny, of all times is the history of WNX Radio and why WNX Radio got started. You had a family that had a hardware store that were selling AM radios, and they wanted to sell AM radios, and there was no AM radio station, so they go out and they start an AM radio station so that they could sell AM radios. But their premise in starting the radio station wasn't necessarily to be the biggest or the best. Their purpose in doing it was there was a need there. There was a need for agriculture in an entire region to be able to get agricultural markets faster. They needed weather reporting because there is no such thing as tornado sirens and the internet and Doppler radar and all of that stuff that we have, all the technology that we have. It was, hey, in Wayne, Nebraska, there's a tornado on the ground. Get to the radio station or get the information to the radio station that there's something that's moving through the area. Sure. And can you imagine the lives that for example, WNX Radio saved over the years by being able to notify people that there was a weather event that was going on.
And it's the kind of thing that a lot of people don't think about. It was just kind of second nature. It's like, wow, of course they would advise us. Well, if they hadn't been there, they couldn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's the premise behind this whole strategic planning process that I love to use as well.
Well, I absolutely love your theory of going out and helping and teaching and training and mentoring people through the farm crisis. As I can remember very well sitting at the kitchen table with my dad in the 80s. I was in high school at the time, and he had come through the 70s. And my dad was a very successful, very hardworking farmer. He was one of the old school guys that he wanted to farm simply for the love of farming. And I could remember the worry in his eyes as you'd get depressing grain markets, or you knew you were going to get a frost the 1st of July that would freeze the buds off from the potatoes, and your potato crop was substantially reduced. And so anytime but there was one thing that I did notice with my dad through most of his career was he never changed banks. And one of the reasons he never changed banks is because they had kind of the same platform. They were always trying to help educate and help the producer become better. And if you've got a producer, or if you've got a loan officer that is simply in it for the interest rates or for any other reason than helping that clientele, they're probably in it for the wrong reason. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's right.
So... Well, Denny, unfortunately, or fortunately, I would say we're down to the end of our third segment. Folks, we're going to be right back.
Hey, this is Jasmine at Pfeiffer's Auction, Realty and Land Management. Pfeiffer's offers multiple ways to bid and buy at our equipment and land auctions. You can bid online, in person, or place pre-bids before the sale even starts. By providing convenient bidding platforms, we make sure that you can buy the items or parcels you want the way you want to. Visit Pfeifers.com to see a complete list of our auctions. When it comes to bidding, go with Pfeifers. Nobody does it better.
We're back with the Legacy of Agriculture. I'm your host, Chris Bair. Denny Everson is joining us in studio at the Pfeifers WNX radio station in Yankton, South Dakota. If you missed the radio show on Saturday mornings at 10 o'clock Central Time, you can join us on Apple, Spotify, and also on YouTube to catch past shows, and also on our website at thelegacyofagriculture.com. Denny, you have had a brisk, amazing career in the agricultural banking industry, and post-retirement, you've been retired for 10 years, right?
13, yes.
13 years. You've done a lot of educating. You have taught a lot of class to young agriculture bankers. And so what has that looked like, and what do you have in the future?
Thanks, Chris. I think, yes, aside from lending money, I was also interested in taking maybe what I had learned and others in the business that worked along beside me in similar times that really were also of interested in being helping other people get better at what they do as an ag lender. And so several of us worked together at Morris, Minnesota, at the University of Minnesota campus, and that came and went. And then I started up, or we founded some 23 years ago, our own national banking, ag banking school in Spearfish. And so myself and several other instructors have, for that many years, helped train and educate over 2,300 bankers in the ag banking industry.
That's amazing. So what is the one thing that you tell young ag bankers as they're getting into the business?
The big thing is to listen, don't talk.
Listen to what they're telling you.
Yes, that's the biggie. And the second one is, the hardest thing to teach is, trying to help them figure out how to analyze the management, their customers' management. And some customers are tremendous at managing, and some aren't so good. And the other thing that's happened is because of the consolidation of farming, you've got the small farmer out here, and then you've got the larger farmer that's getting larger all the time. And the two of them, the small farmer's management isn't the same as it might be in the management of the large operation. And consequently, it's helping everybody try to understand how do you work with both, because it's important. They're both important to food production in this country. And so I think that's the big thing. And so sometimes, and then of course there's about analytics, analyzing the credit and helping them understand how to better understand the credit and financially. That's a given. But I think the big piece and part that we most appreciated was having the opportunity to share with them what we know.
Okay.
And hopefully they took that on and made it successful for themselves.
So now that you retired for banking after 37 years, and now you've taught for 13 years, and you're going to kind of semi-retire, you're one of those guys. You're like one of my mentors when I got out of college. He just kept working and working and working. What now?
Well, I've had the so I've just recently resigned from this, teaching ag lenders across the country in our national school. I resigned from that, and at that time I had the opportunity and was asked to cooperate with the University of Minnesota Farm Financial Management Group to teach Native Americans ag lending, and we've done this now for 3 years. We had 3 classes, 1 class a year, 4 to 5 day classes, and 20 to 30 students, Native American, commercial, a lot of times commercial and consumer lenders interested in how to make an ag loan, and from all 50 states, and from several different tribes all across the country, including here in South Dakota.
So you've been doing that for several years. What are you learning from teaching those classes and helping those amazing people?
Chris, it's like I tell them after every class, without a doubt, they are the most attentive participants, or students, I'll call them. They're not really that, but participants that I've ever had in the classroom. There are so many in that group that are not there just to learn a profession. They're there to try to make a difference for their people.
Absolutely.
And that's what's so exciting about it. And it shows up, and it's just like every day I go in there and teach, it's like, wow, this is another day. This is going to be another great day. And it is. It always is. They have great questions. They're attentive. And it's been fun. I mean, it's if there's a way to cap a career that I've loved, this is probably it.
Amazing. One question that I do want to ask you is that we have some of the most amazing young people that are coming up through high school and through our colleges now and getting good educations and starting out in their careers is what advice would you give that 14, 15, 16, 18, 22-year-old agriculturist that wants to be in agriculture, whether it's in production ag, whether it's in being a technician? What advice would you give them?
If you have an interest, follow your gut. And if you follow your gut, no matter what profession you're going to be involved in the food production industry in this world, and it's not just this nation, but this world, go with it. I think we are on the precipice of one of the greatest. I really do believe if you thought agriculture was important in the past, I think we're coming on an era that is never going to have been more important, because it's all not just about food anymore. It's also about sustainable energy and utilizing the same stuff we're growing for food as we do to try to produce energy, and do it to accommodate all of the concerns we have today. And so I think it's an amazing route to go, whether you're in lending or you're a producer or you're selling real estate. It's like, hey, this is we're going to have tough times. There's always corrections.
Sure.
But as I always told my staff, and still, tell anybody today that'll listen, there's corrections, and yep, they're tough when we have them, but they don't last forever.
That is true. What goes up comes down, and what comes down goes back up. That's just ebb and flow, and that's life. Stay the course.
That's exactly right.
That's one thing that I've always loved about the auction industry is that 35 years ago when I started in the auction industry, it was fascinating to me, and it was more about the people than it was the industry. It's the fascinating people. Well, Denny, we're coming down to the end of our fourth segment, and unfortunately the end of this episode of Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it. I know you're very busy. I hear lots of really good things about from past coworkers and people that have rubbed shoulders with you over the years. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's been an honor, Chris, and thank you for inviting me.
Folks, we're down to the end of this episode of The Legacy of Agriculture with Denny Everson. We appreciate Denny for joining us. You can listen to Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, or simply go to our website at thelegacyofagriculture.com. You can catch all of our past shows. Also want to thank our sponsor, Pifer Auction and Realty. Nobody does it better.
In it here now, I'm going to do now. I'm going to bid on here now. Who bid $500,000 bid?
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of The Legacy of Agriculture with Chris Bair, sponsored by Pifer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Call Pifer's at 605-836-2277.